Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining for yet another AACRAO's Credential Chats. We're really excited this week to be joined by Meagan Treadway from Grand Valley State University. Meagan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And Meagan is the Director of Special Projects with the GV Next Ed CoLab. And previous to that was in the Office of the Registrar for the better part of a decade. So definitely want to jump into some really specific questions around community collaboration. But maybe first you could anchor those of us who are watching live or watching this on replay with just a little bit of context of where Grand Valley is in your journey with digital credentials.
Sure. So we have been playing in the field of digital credentials themselves for a little while now, like issuing badges and those kinds of things. But it's been about a year in the making now where we've been exploring this concept of a digital credential wallet. So it actually took a year's worth of planning, beginning with a design sprint last January, so January of 2023, that is, where we brought together members of the community across various sectors, so other higher ed partners, K-12, workforce, ecosystem enablers to really kind of brainstorm on this topic, take a look at, what current state is, what's coming up, around the pike, what's changing, what that could mean for the future of education, and where we thought we could have an impact, like in the most practical sense, right? And so from that design sprint, we kind of, came to a conclusion on where we could, maybe have some impact. Got some folks who were interested in carrying that idea forward. So a subset of folks from that design sprint to comprise a working pilot group moving forward. We convened some meetings that last winter semester, really explored that idea, what we'd be looking for with a digital credential wallet, what kind of credentials we'd be putting in there, what characteristics, attributes we'd want from a wallet. Took that and essentially designed what we comprise as a rubric then for exploring vendors who could provide that service to us. So really all of last summer then was an exploration of possible vendors where we arrived then at our vendor of choice and then essentially kind of circled back through really. So it's a very iterative process. So then all through the fall, we found ourselves kind of having all those same conversations again, both with internal Grand Valley stakeholders and going back to our pilot partners, now with the added advice of our vendor and, the experience that they brought to the table to really, further refine the scope and the focus of our project. Got final sign off on everything by the end of the year here, beginning of this year, and we are just in the early stages now of implementing our pilot.
Man, and as somebody who loves sticky notes, I'm just really enjoying hearing about this design thinking,
Yeah.
iterative process, stakeholder engagement, and definitely want to dig into some of that stakeholder engagement, especially around kind of shared meaning making around something where, folks were coming together to design something that there probably was a lot of time spent just getting everybody to like be talking about the same thing. But before that, one of the things I wanted to talk about is just the executive sponsorship that you have for that and what that looks like, how that came together, and just how that's, kind of been a part of this process.
Yeah, so as early as the design sprint, right, we had representation from top level executive, right? President Mantella, the president for Grand Valley State University, was there to do the introduction. She and other folks at her level sat in on that, had input, kind of listened from the variety of involvement. And she was there to debrief. The design sprint itself actually started with an evening dinner and, to do relationship building. And then it was the whole next day to do the action part of it. So the dinner itself was hosted at her home, kind of thing. Like she's very highly involved right from the beginning. And then when we were calling on those other members across the various sectors, we were very keen to select those who we knew had that like decision-making capability, right? Because we wanted to be sure we were calling on the people who could, call into play the resources that would be required to pull something like this off. Now, that's to say that you also realize then when you're having those kind of conversations that it's a process in the planning too, that that, okay, you start with those who make the decisions, but you have to be very respectful of including the voices that need to be included at the table when you get down to the implementation steps and the decisions that impact those stages, because yes, these are the folks that make the decisions, but they're not always necessarily the ones that do the work day to day, right? And so you want to keep that in mind as well. But no, we've had really great engagement from Grand Valley at all levels of leadership, especially, starting, like I said, with President Mantella herself, across enrollment development, information technology, those big areas, they're going to have a huge impact and provide resources to get this project going and moving forward. And then also leadership across the different, project partners we've had and the areas that we've been working in throughout the little consortium we've formed here in West Michigan.
And when you keep talking about stakeholders, and I think you kind of hinted that you're going beyond, the kind of corners of Grand Valley campus here, engaging with K-12 partners, engaging with employers. And I normally like to start with the why, but I'm going to go in reverse order and actually kind of start with the what, because going back to that sort of design sprint wondering that I had of how hard was it to get people on board with what the what is, and maybe for the folks who are watching who are thinking, okay, there's badges, and now we're hearing about these other containers called wallets. For Grand Valley, like, how are you framing the what of these wallet containers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where I mean, we have some upcoming conferences, right? I'll do a few plugs for those. And as I've applied for some of those, I've kind of, thought about the title I wanted each of my presentations to be called, and thinking on ones I've heard over the course of like the last couple of years, right? And the approach people have taken. And I kept thinking to myself, right, we're kind of really taking a backward design approach to some of this. And it takes all types, and it really is reliant on all of these pieces and processes coalescing it eventually, right? So none of the work is wrong by any means. It's just whatever works for you in the time that you're doing it. And so, yes, back to your original question. When we're working with educators, right, and we're counting ourselves as that as well, in that category, we tend to all like to be a little like idealistic, right? And so it's fun to have these conversations because you get into those bigger pictures and those like, oh, and if we did this, this is the long-term plan of where we want to see education go, right? And yes, that is the dream, but let's pull it back a little bit, like, how do we get there? What can we do today to make a difference, right? What can we do that is achievable now to make a dent, or make a small step in that direction? And so, like I said, kind of tying those two thoughts together, there are a lot of people out there doing a lot of great work in taking, coursework and things that are provided today, a lot of their credentials, and now like teasing those apart into kind of that finer grain learning by identifying like the skills and the competencies and doing all of that mapping, which again, we have plans to get there eventually, but we kind of took, again, that backwards approach and said, that's all fine and well, that's great, but if you do it, like, okay, that's great, but like, where do you put it? You have to have somewhere to put it first, so we're kind of doing a like, if you build it, they will come approach, right? So we said, let's step back, let's focus on just the shipping container itself first. Let's identify that, figure out how to put that into function, like just test the piping, right? Like just get that up and running, how to implement it in our systems. Like let's check the ebb and flow of it, the sending, the receiving, just with our current credentials as they are today. Like, let's just do that part. Let's just pick a wallet and just start using it. Then from there, we can talk about all those other possibilities. What else can we put into our wallet? What else can we do to expand on the credentials we currently have? Who else can we bring into our network? All of those other questions can be asked after that.
And just super specifically for people who are thinking, well, I thought that the badges and some of these other things, Megan is saying that those were the shipping containers. And now she's saying that there's a bigger shipping container that those can go into.
A lot of jargon, right?
And so do you mind just quickly clarifying, just sort of for, in the conversations of Grand Valley, just for the people who showed up saying, okay, we have different kinds of digital credentials. What is a digital wallet?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I usually start these conversations by saying I do not have a computer science background. So I'm right there with you, right? I am not a technical person. I'm a biologist by trade, okay? I've had to learn all of this too. So one of the things that I like to do is rely really heavily on analogies. And so again, this is going to make me sound really old, but going back to like when the internet was created, right? Like same thing with how that all kind of started in its little pockets and then it all coalesced and just kind of became ubiquitous, right? Like that's kind of what we're thinking is going to happen with this credential wallet concept, Web 3.0, all these different kind of concepts, right? So if you take it and you break it down into pieces like we know of the internet today, I like to think of the wallet as like a web browser, right? So there's all of that information out in the internet today. That is all of the credentials, right? Like any website you're going to go to is to go out and see your certificate or see your transcript or see your badge or see, but you have to have a way to get there or show or store or transmit that information. That's the wallet, right? Just like the web browser is your way of accessing that information. And for anybody who's technical, feel free to correct me on that because probably people are in the audience wincing a little bit about that. But that's my layman's way of interpreting it. And I like that concept, that analogy a little bit too, because it takes it a step further with some of these concepts and the idea that the interoperability, right, is what's so important for a lot of this work. And so similar to the web browser idea, as long as all of our credentials are created following this like standard language, it doesn't matter what web browser you use to access that information, right? Like we're picking a particular wallet to use today with Grand Valley and the little pilot we're doing, but anyone should be able to transmit that information through any wallet they choose to use. Or if they start out with the wallet we're using today, and they go to a different organization with a different wallet, they can move all of their credentials from this one into that next one if they want to. So it's all, it's theirs to have forever in perpetuity, and they can move it wherever they want for as long as they want to hold it, and totally interoperable, throughout their lifetime. So it's all about making sure that we're not sending any of our learners or anyone like that down any sort of dead end. That's the most important piece for me.
And I really like your analogy, and I think that anybody who has a problem with it, they need to back off of leave Megan alone there. I think that this is really complicated stuff, and I think
Mhm.
you're giving people permission to realize, we may still be figuring out the right analogies, but this is graspable. You don't need to have a technical expertise around this stuff to start to figure
Yeah.
out, just what it is. And, with our last couple of minutes, because time flies, going back to that question of why, as you're engaging these different stakeholders who a lot of times, we know that they're important, but we're also not necessarily, we're kind of siloed from each other. And there's not often a lot of urgency around these different nodes actually connecting and creating, community collaboration and design teams to figure out what this wallet needs to be and what are the functional requirements and use cases. And so can you kind of just describe for maybe a handful of the kind of stakeholders who you were bringing together for this work? What's the why that you're sharing with them and internally for to engage them as part of the process?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for our smaller consortium, our little collab here in West Michigan, we've been talking about the benefits to the learners in the ease of communicating their information, right? So first and foremost, like one of the main points was the ease of movement from like K-12 to higher ed, from higher ed to employer, right? Then we take it the step further once we get down some of our later phases of implementation, where once you have the wallet and you can work through some of these concepts with the student, that helps them understand a more holistic, right? It helps them develop a more holistic understanding of their learning and what that means for their skills and their capabilities, especially like Grand Valley itself, right? We're a liberal education, right? And we know all sorts of questions are being asked about the value of liberal education these days. And so being able to help the students understand the value that they're seeing between their lived experiences, the majors, the careers they're choosing, and those connections and the value that they're going to glean from those, and building out those portfolios and those like intentional choices they're making about those tracks and those pathways they choose. Those are some of the benefits as well. And so like the mobility for the learner, the expansion in capturing like broader learning from a variety of sources, finer grained learning, so at a deeper depth, But then also just practically when we're speaking about like the network itself, again, back to the analogies. We talk about how, it's probably really hard to be, one of the first 10 people on a fax machine, but it probably made it a little easier if you knew the other 9 people you were trying to send a fax to, right? So if we can start forming these little pockets of networks like this and really help our learners in these, these smaller locales, the intent is not to stay like geographically constrained like that in the long run, but it's a place to start, right? And as those grow, then they'll start overlapping with each other and forming these larger networks that will eventually spread.
Meagan Treadway, thank you so much. I think you're not the only one with a fax machine, might be our tagline for this episode of Credential Chats. Thank you
Back to
so much
friend.
for back to Brett. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you at the annual meeting in April.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Noah. Have a good day.